All right, today we're diving into a really brutal and honestly decisive battle from World War I that you probably haven't heard much about. It's an incredible story of overconfidence, a desperate last-ditch defense, and how one single bloody stalemate managed to completely flip the script on an entire campaign. This is the Battle of Ctesiphon. So let's set the scene. The year is 1915. We're in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. On one side, you've got the British Empire, and they are feeling good, riding a year-long winning streak. And on the other side, the Ottoman Empire, pushed all the way back to their final line of defense right before the legendary city of Baghdad. These two empires are on a collision course. So how did we even get to this point? Well, for the British, this whole campaign in Mesopotamia had been, up until now, just a stunning success story. I mean, for a solid year, the British-led Indian Expeditionary Force D just seemed totally unstoppable. They landed way down south at Al Fao, immediately grabbed the vital port of Basra, and then just kept rolling north up the Tigris River. Amara falls, then they get a huge win at Es-Sin. They had all the momentum, and their confidence was through the roof. And with his troops just a stone's throw away, the top British commander in the region, General Sir John Nixon, saw his chance. He tells his guy on the ground, Major General Charles Townshend, to go for it. Take the ultimate prize, Baghdad. Now, Townshend himself was a bit nervous, worried about his supply lines being stretched way too thin. But an order's an order. The final push was on. But here's the thing. This final push towards Baghdad, it wasn't just against another dusty town. The British were marching toward a place that was just steeped in history, a natural-born fortress that was once the capital of ancient empires. And wow, did the Ottomans pick their spot well. Ctesiphon sits inside this massive 6-mile loop of the Tigris River, which makes it an absolute nightmare to try and outflank. They basically took the ruins of this ancient capital and transformed them into a seriously tough modern fortress. Now, if you look at the numbers, the British were actually in a tough spot. They've got about 11,000 troops going up against 18,000 Ottomans, who also have way more artillery. But after winning for a whole year, the British were pretty cocky. They looked down on the Ottoman commander, Nuruddin Pasha. They seriously underestimated him. And that was a massive mistake. Because while the British were marching, Nuruddin was getting ready. He had 55 days, and he used every second to lay a brilliant trap. We're talking 2 deep lines of trenches, a 20-foot-high ancient wall that made a perfect observation post, and he even mined the river to stop the British gunboats. This was not going to be some walk in the park. Okay, so you've got this incredible fortress waiting for you. How on earth does Townshend plan to crack it? Well, Townshend basically decided, hey, let's just do what worked before. He came up with this really complex, multi-pronged attack. He split his smaller army into 4 columns. 3 were going to hit the front, and this 4th, flying column, was going to swing way out to the side and hit him on the flank. On paper, it's a classic move. But Nuruddin saw it coming a mile away. His plan was way simpler, but totally brilliant. He set up his trenches in an L shape and put his best, freshest troops right on the flank where he knew the main attack would land. Then he kept his veteran troops in reserve, ready to jump in anywhere, and his artillery could hit any spot on the line. It was a perfectly flexible defense. The attack kicks off on November 22nd. The British do this grueling night march to try and get the element of surprise, but it backfires. The terrain was so bad that his columns got confused, drifted off course, and walked right into the teeth of the Ottoman line, the strongest part of the entire defense. A fatal error. And in the midst of all this chaos, you get these little human details that just stick with you. A British soldier later said they couldn't even pronounce Ctesiphon. He said, "We calls it Pistopon." Kind of puts you right there on the ground with them, doesn't it? The fighting that first day was just ferocious. One of the columns, made up of Punjabis and Gurkhas, fought with unbelievable courage and actually managed to break into the first Ottoman trench line. But just as Nuruddin had planned, his reserves were thrown in, they plugged the gap, and the whole battle just devolved into this bloody, horrific fight for every single inch of ground. So, by the end of that first day, the British have a tiny foothold to show for their efforts, but they are exhausted and absolutely battered. Day 2 brought no relief, just more of the same horrific fighting, and the casualties, they just kept climbing on both sides. And the cost was just staggering. The British lost 4,600 men, killed, wounded. That's 40% of their entire attacking force, gone. An army just can't take that kind of hit and keep moving forward. Now the Ottomans, they actually lost even more men, over 6,200. Some of their units were practically wiped out. But here's the crucial difference. Their supply lines back to Baghdad were short. They could get more men, more ammo. The British couldn't. They were at the end of a very long, very thin rope. So after 2 days of this absolute meat grinder, both armies are completely shattered. In fact, on the third day, both generals actually ordered a withdrawal. Which leaves us with a fascinating question, right? Who actually won the Battle of Ctesiphon? Well, tactically, on the battlefield itself, it was a draw. Nobody could land and knock out below. But strategically, for the British Empire, it was an absolute, unmitigated disaster. See, for an invading army deep in enemy territory, a draw is as bad as a loss. They had completely lost the momentum they couldn't afford to lose. So on that third day, November 24th, Townsend takes a look at his mauled forces and decides, that's it, we can't go on. He orders a retreat. Now, Norodin was also thinking about pulling back, but then he gets word that the British are actually leaving, and he realizes this is his moment. And the consequences of this stalemate were immediate, and they were catastrophic for the British. First off, their advance on Baghdad was stopped cold. It also proved to everyone that the Ottoman army was not a spent force. And maybe most critically, it exposed that fatal weakness in the British supply line, which led directly to one of the biggest disasters in British military history, the Siege of Kut. I mean, it was a complete and total reversal of fortune. The army that had been so confidently marching on Baghdad was now just a shattered group of survivors, retreating for their lives back down the Tigris. And as soon as Nuruddin realized they were on the run, he turned his own battered army around and gave chase. So, the huge takeaway here is that Ctesiphon was a massive wake-up call. For a year, the British had been fighting smaller, weaker Ottoman units. Here at Ctesiphon, they finally ran into a well-prepared, well-led army defending its home turf. And that army, fighting on its own, broke the British winning streak for good. And really, that leaves us with this final, powerful thought. Ctesiphon shows us that a battle doesn't need a clear winner to be decisive. Sometimes a brutal draw, just a simple halt in momentum, is enough to unravel an entire campaign. It proves that in war, a single bloody stalemate can be far more significant than a dozen victories.